Alright, welcome back everybody. Here's a look at the jig that I made for the upcoming rally car. Now it is not necessary to make a jig, just I figured I'd make one just in case it's successful. I can repeat the process much more easily and make it repeatable much more easily. Things I can say definitely for sure is take your time, double check all of your measurements, and really think things through, because this plastic, like if you use thick plastic like I did here, this stuff really isn't that cheap. I mean, it is cheap, but it actually costs more in shipping than it did for the plastic itself. So be sure to label your jig, and as you can see right here, I've labeled mine. A lot of times I use metric and standard, depends on which. Let's see, the ruler here that I got, it's got both. Sometimes, I hate working in 30 seconds or 64ths or 10 thousandths or 100 thousandths of an inch. It's just a pain in the ass. And metric systems a lot of times so much nicer. So that's why you see double measurements in my case. I usually use metric. It's just a lot nicer. It's a lot more friendly. So what you're seeing right here, for example, 70 millimeters. That's the outside edge right here to the center point, the theoretical center line of the chassis. That's what that is. Okay, so that's the outside edge where the steering knuckle would be if this was the front, but this is the rear, obviously. So that would be 70 millimeters. But where we're going to put the hole for the steering knuckle, because I'm not going to worry about steering articulation or steering geometry, I want to put the hole at 63 millimeters, and that's about where I am. So, and there it is on the other side. And always double check it. I measure from one side, check it, and then I measure it from the other side and check it, and then make sure. Take your time cutting these things out. You want them as square as possible, and you can see they're not perfect, but and again, you're probably not going to notice that this is not totally square. I mean, really, just looking at it on edge. I use a table saw, raise up the blade as high as I'll cut, and then I cut to where I thought it was close to this thin line right here. Then I stopped it, turned it off, and I moved to the next one and the next one, so on and so forth. And I flip it over, repeated the process, and I just finished it with a router and then a sanding tool, a handheld sanding tool, and then this is the front. The front's basically the same as the rear, 70 millimeters to the outside edge from the theoretical center point. So that would be the outside edge. Then 63 millimeters to where we're going to make some sort of hole to put the steering knuckle. And so there's my theoretical front. Now I did mess up on this jig, and so this is your opportunity to learn from my mistakes. I knew when I was placing my wheel up in here, when I placed my wheel, that if I turned it to the right, the tires would be basically in this area, in this theoretical area, running this way. Turn it to the left, maybe running in this area, out this direction. So this was supposed to be removed on my jig, but I didn't do it. So let me show you the results, what I got so far. On your wheelbase, if you're using average touring cars, most touring cars, 1/10 scale, are 256 millimeters. It kind of depends on if you got toe in or toe out on whatever model you happen to be working with, but 256 millimeters should be real close, and then once you get your body, you can probably fine tune it from there. So let me show you the plastic chassis. So what you're looking at here is this is 3/16 thick, wrong side here. So it's 3/16 from this edge to that edge, thick ABS plastic that's been heat formed. So this is going to be the business end, what I call the business end. Your motor is going to go somewhere in here, your ESC receiver servo on this side, your battery somewhere in this area, your steering up here, and this is your suspension, or at least what I'm going to do for this rally car. This is going to be my flex point for this to flex up and down, because there's not going to be a whole lot of suspension travel to begin with, and I want to stiffen up the suspension without causing damage to the shock towers, and I figure that's going to be the best way to do it. So when you're working with plastic, you always want to put a corner on here, put a radius on here, because if you make this a straight cut, you're going to just create a split, and this is eventually going to split. I mean, it probably still might split in a hard wreck, but just through normal suspension travel up and down, this is going to be less likely to split. Then you're going to want to ease all these sharp edges, every single one of them. Get out all the saw marks, because those saw marks are going to cause, like you can clearly see the saw marks from the table saw. You're going to want to get rid of all of those. Turn this around a little bit. And you see there's a little bit of height difference going on right here. That's okay. I'm going to trim this down anyway. I'm going to level it all out. And it's not even necessary to heat bend any of this stuff. I mean, you can cut strips of it and glue it straight on there. I'll provide a link to how I did it before. And this is not necessary, but this will probably have to be sanded down to make room for the steering rods that are going to come through here eventually. And that's it, man. Just double take every measurement. And I need to refine center of this chassis again. I just use a simple little sharp tool, which happen to be a Phillips screwdriver with a tip ground off. And I rescribe my lines. This is black. I just painted it white if I didn't mention that. And then always double checking my measurements as I go and label everything front and rear. The rear section's not necessary. This is just planned to make a rear diffuser area. Front area is not necessary. I just planned on making kind of like a front bumper, but it's going to be angled up slightly, so that way if it hits a little bit larger stones, it'll help lift the whole body up versus bottoming out or slamming in hard. So that should be it, and that should get you guys started. Oh, this is the opportunity to double check your wheelbase once you got your plastic done. A jig is not necessary, but it's just helpful. Double check your wheelbase at this point in time. This is where you're going to want to center your axles, so like your rear axle to your front axle. Take your time, and also mark out your 63 millimeter hole, which is going to be somewhere in this area here. I haven't done it yet, obviously, but then you're going to drill it with the appropriate size screw, and then we're going to trim it down. I left it square intentionally. I'm going to trim it down to fit inside the wheel. And the same on the front here. Even though I'm showing it here, this fits the wheel nicely, but I haven't done it here. I intentionally left it long. And if you make a jig, don't be surprised if you have a hard time getting this out of the jig. So that's what it looks like inside the jig. And that's how I formed it. And I found the best tool. Like you can clearly see now, if you were to fold this black piece over this direction, all I did was I make one long pass, and I finished it with my rotary tool right up to this point here, and I actually cut it just a little bit heavy right there to provide what's called a relief cut. So that way when you bend this over, it doesn't stress the plastic too much, and I put a relief cut on each one of my folds. More than likely, like I said before, I'm going to fill in a simple little piece of plastic right here. I'm going to glue it in place, and then I'm just going to cut the rest of it off to allow room for steering. I was hoping to keep it straight so that way I could put a wheel well in there to help keep things nice and clean inside, but that's kind of like out of it for now. Anyway, I hope that inspires you guys to create your own vehicle, or maybe even repair your own chassis. Maybe you got a broken chassis, or maybe your chassis isn't quite good enough for your needs. Like, you don't necessarily have to have this the way I'm doing it, but this is probably thick enough to drill into to make correct steering geometry or suspension geometry, where your wheel travels straight up and down instead of at an arc, which is what mine's going to do. Anyway, good luck to y'all.